everyone, and welcome to the podcast. My name is Billy Dees. If you've never checked out our program before, we are primarily an interview podcast, commentary, and so on. You can find the Billy Dees podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, on down the list. And you can also find me on Twitter. That's kind of like my social media home, at Billy Dees on Twitter. And on the Skype line with me today, I have Kay. How are you doing, Kay?
Doing very well today. How are you, Billy?
I'm doing fantastic. Now, Kay is KayPal7 on TikTok, and she has an absolute ton of followers. It's like up to 50,000 or something like that now. And you can also find her on Twitter. And I notice you haven't done a whole lot with Twitter yet, but she's KayPal3 on Twitter?
Yes, sir.
All right. Kay has an interesting subject today. What we're going to talk about is how to manage behavior issues, especially in regard to children, and how to sometimes scale those situations back. So, very interesting topic here. Let's talk about you first. Now, you are from Texas, isn't that right?
Yes, I was originally born and raised in El Paso, Texas, and I moved to the Austin area about 3.5 years ago.
Awesome. Your career when you're not on TikTok is, and that could be a career the way you're going. You are a special education teacher. Is that the right way to put it?
Yes, sir. Special education teacher with a focus in behavior.
Okay. What drew you to that field?
Well, when I was in school, I didn't learn to read until about 4th grade. They discovered I had really severe dyslexia.
Oh, okay.
And diagnosticians don't really say this anymore, but they told my mom that I might never learn to read. And so with a lot of help from her and some really good teachers, I actually ended up going to school, getting my master's degree. So I just always wanted to go back and help kids out that are struggling.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's a great calling. Have nothing but respect for the work you do, and thank you for the work you do. I know in today's political climate and everything with the parents and all the politics around schools and everything else involved, I know it's a lot of work, and I really want to thank you for your service there. You're making the world a better place. I just talk about it, but you're making the world a better place. In this day and age of COVID-19, obviously big lifestyle changes for most of us, for pretty much all of us, I would say. How are you holding up with COVID-19?
Oh, well, pretty good. I actually have an autoimmune disease, so I've been pretty much locked in my house, except for sometimes in my car for a while. But luckily with technology, our school district has been able to continue to teach kids from home. So we're doing distance learning at this point. Yeah.
I'm from Ohio, and our governor has received accolades pretty much from all over the world on how he's handled this. And Governor DeWine, I believe, has done a good job. There are those people on the fringes who are all concerned about their liberties being taken away and all this. And I don't feel it's come to that point yet. But you're never going to please everyone. But as a whole, he has done a masterful job, and he has gotten a lot of credit for heading off the issue early. Fortunately, our state has managed it so far pretty well, but it is different. You know, you go to the grocery store, they have the big glass screens up now, and I have a feeling this is going to be a part of a change of a lifestyle that's going to be around a long time. Would you agree with that?
Definitely. I think once people realize that they don't always have to go into work in order to get the job done, it might change a lot of things about how we do business. Yeah.
I have a feeling that social mores are going to change as well, shaking hands. And I can't even begin to imagine what they're going to do in New York and places like that where people are shoulder to shoulder in the subways and all that. I can't imagine, maintaining social distance in that situation.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, so it's going to be interesting, I guess, is a good way of putting it. With that being said, a lot of people camping out at home, they have the kids, and it can be stressful. Parents often take themselves, a break, so to speak, when the kids go off to school. And if they have careers, they don't have to worry about the kids. If they're stay-at-home parents, they don't have to worry about managing the kids while they're going about their home duties. Now, all of a sudden, all these people are scrunched up together. And this is becoming, I would certainly say, an issue nationwide. And a lot of times, I guess, tantrums can come out of that and these other things. So I guess one of the first questions I would have for you is, what causes behavior issues? And how can we recognize that?
Well, it could be a lot of different things. Different kids are born having different temperaments, but usually when it gets to the point where an interventionist like me would have to help out that kid or intervene, it can be due to either a processing disorder that they may have been born with, or in a lot of cases, it's childhood trauma that can cause those sort of outbursts.
Yeah.
So basically, when a baby's developing in utero, one of the first places of the brain that develops is the amygdala, which is what's used to regulate people's emotions.
Yeah.
That's basically when you feel in danger and your fight or flight response is triggered, that's going to be what lights up under an MRI is your amygdala.
Okay.
So anytime a kid feels threatened, they're going to go into one of four different phases. They're either going to want to fight, they're going to want to flee, they're going to want to freeze, or there's a new one now that they've added to that called the fawn response. So what's interesting is if a kid has experienced trauma, and the younger they experience it, the more it affects them, they're finding. When a kid feels like they're being confronted, this can often give them basically a hair trigger of a fight or flight response.
Okay.
So when the amygdala is engaged, basically reasoning is turned off in the brain, and they're using what we refer to as the lizard brain, the very primitive brain.
Okay.
So if you're asking a kid to do something that stresses them out, and they've had, bad experiences, let's say with math or something, and that sort of thing gets triggered, they might freeze and just sit there. They might try to fight you, or they might try to escape the situation. So it's important, I think, to know what's going on in their brain.
Yeah.
When that sort of thing happens.
When a child is exhibiting, let's call it bad behavior,
Mm-hmm.
And I say that because one of the first responses that a lot of parents have, a lot of old school parents have, is, well, this kid just needs his butt kicked. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So the response is to grab him by the arms, sit him down, and listen, that type of thing. What goes through when you're talking about children who have these issues on a chronic level? What goes through their mind when that's happening?
Well, you're kind of reinforcing the fact that there's a threat. School is not supposed to be a threat for kids. Putting a book in front of a kid and asking them to read is not supposed to be a threatening situation.
Right.
But if they have enough trauma associated with that, it can be. And, different parents have different parenting styles. My mom was definitely the type that let's just yell at her until she says the word right.
Yeah.
But that can further trigger that fight or flight response. And when they're in that state, the reasoning brain turns off. So even if they really wanted to solve that math problem for you or read that sentence, it's going to be 10 times as hard when they're feeling like they're in danger. I
was pretty fortunate. Now, my dad was an old school disciplinarian, but he never implemented that when it came to something I just simply couldn't do. If I had problems mastering a skill or something, he didn't get mad at me for that. Now, behavior was a completely different thing. I did some things. I probably shouldn't say. This was back when Evel Knievel was very popular. I lit my bike on fire one year and went over.
Oh, wow.
I built a ramp for myself, and everybody in the neighborhood, because somebody called the police, of course, and everybody in the neighborhood just figured I was going to get the tar beat out of me, but he was actually pretty cool with that. Things like that he didn't tolerate too much. But he in those situations, very much a disciplinarian, but not when it came to learning. So I was very lucky, and a lot of kids aren't that way. A lot of parents feel that they can force a child to learn something. That's just not possible, is it?
Any child can be taught. I will stand by that, but
Okay.
you have to do it a certain way for different kids. It's just like when you're coaching, a sports team or something. Some people respond better to saying, I believe in you. I know you can do it. And some
Right.
people respond better to the coach that's going to make you run suicides until you can, run fast enough or whatever he's trying to have you do.
Right.
So it really depends on getting to know your kid, feeling out what their learning style is, that kind of thing.
Sure.
You can force them to learn, but it's got to be the right way, I guess.
Yeah, I meant when I said forced, I mean like through some physical or psychological manipulation, force them to do it. That's what I meant. I didn't necessarily mean force them by continuing to, help them. Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about trauma, because I know that that's something probably here in the last 10 years, there's a greater awareness now of the effects of trauma. And there wasn't so much when I was growing up. Mm-hmm. The effects of trauma can certainly have an impact on the developing mind. That can linger into adulthood. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and how it can throw people off as they get older?
Oh, definitely. So, there's two different kinds of ways that someone can experience trauma. You could have one major event in early life that was very traumatic that can affect you the rest of your life. But there's also like these microaggression traumas, maybe growing up in a household with a parent that always was yelling and just you had to walk on eggshells. That prolonged exposure can cause trauma and change the way that you behave as an adult.
Yeah.
I used to think, if it happened when the kid is so young they can't remember it, that's probably better. Maybe it doesn't affect them as much, but they've actually found that while the brain is still developing, the younger it happens, the more your brain can be shaped by the trauma that has happened to you. And it does change the way that even adults react to pressure situations.
Yeah. That's interesting. Like I said, a lot of, I guess a good way of putting it was the PTSD. Now, I believe my dad had that. Now, he passed away years ago, and that was before that term was widely used. But he had a very traumatic childhood, very violent background. His brother was killed in combat. Just a whole bunch of bad things happened to him. And he had a lot of those things that you hear about with PTSD. Just like the example of me setting the bike on fire, it said very little. But in another situation, I dropped a fork on the floor, and he could go through the roof. Mm-hmm. So I kind of feel that did impact me, knowing what I know now. Maybe I didn't know it at the time, and this was before a lot of that was known. But I can certainly say that I've been on that ride. Mm-hmm. It makes it very difficult, I would say, from the aspect of being a teacher. When you sense that in a child, are you ever in a situation where you notice that there's a behavior that you associate with some sort of a trauma, and maybe the parents and the people in that child's environment don't realize it?
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I'm a parent too, and we all just try to mess up our kids less than our parents messed us up. Yeah. You know what I mean? And I realize that 99% of people are trying their best, so I'm not judging parents at all in that situation. But if you have a kid that, if a teacher, and they're not supposed to, but if a teacher blows up and yells at a kid, the kid that is often unfazed by it, you'd say, oh, they have a behavior problem, but that kid probably doesn't get hit at home because he's not terrified of the teacher when the teacher blows up like that. Oh. So there are things that you maybe wouldn't consider. Whereas if you have one where a kid, maybe a young kid, wets his pants when a teacher yells at him, that might indicate that there's something traumatic going on at home. But we try not to jump to conclusions. I know a lot of parents are really careful in this age where CPS people get called more and more and all that stuff. Most teachers are giving parents the benefit of the doubt. And unless it's something that is just a huge red flag, we usually assume that the parents are good people. So.
Oh, sure. Yeah, you'd have to, I guess. Now, you mentioned this freeze or fawn response, and you talked about it briefly, but quite frankly, I have never heard of that. I have no idea what that is. Do you want to talk a little bit about what the difference is?
Sure. Like in the animal world, you run up on a deer, let's say in the forest, the deer's not going to fight you, another animal would, but the deer's going to run away. Whereas if they get so overwhelmed by something like, let's say, a car coming at them in the middle of the road, you'll notice that sometimes deer will just stand there and freeze.
Yeah.
And that one is a bit more well known than the fawn response. The fawn response happens basically when a kid grows up in a tense or abusive situation for a prolonged period of time. They become very empathetic people. They're very keyed into other people's emotions. And that is a survival mechanism they've developed because they know that if they keep the people that they are around pacified, that they are less likely to be abused or bullied.
That is interesting. I've never heard that before, but that really makes sense. Yeah, that's something that I would have to say here again, knowing what I know now. There were a lot of times when I was on extra good behavior, I guess is a good way to put it. And because I never knew what was going to set the old man off. And I don't mean to say that my dad was a bad parent, because he wasn't. He never hit me or my mother. And now he was violent. He was the type to get into fights and stuff, but he never hit us. And he came close to throwing a toolbox at me one time, but he didn't do it. And he was a good provider. He was always a good worker, went to work, just like a good employee. He always did. He was an engineer by trade. And I have no doubt, there's absolutely no doubt in my mind, he was very loyal to my mother. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind about that. She probably wishes that he did at certain times have interest in other women. But I'm making a joke there. But he was, it was that temper, that unpredictable, side of him that made him very difficult to live with. When you notice a child, let's say, is in your family, and they might be in an environment like that, and it's really not your child, maybe it's your cousin, your nephew, or something like that. Is there a good way of handling that? Is there a good way to approach that child and possibly talk to them and feel them out a little bit?
Yeah. Whenever I'm dealing with kids, my very first instinct is to always disarm them. I'm not going to get anywhere if they are in fight or flight mode.
Right.
I need to make sure that they feel safe around me. So what I always do with that is I assume right off the bat that they are an excellent, wonderful kid.
Sure.
Because even if they're not, if you're putting out there something that a kid with behavior problems probably doesn't hear a lot is, hey, look, I know you're a good kid and I know you want to do well and I believe you can do this, but you usually don't act like this. What's going on? And just coming at it from that way, even if you don't really know them that well, especially for the kids that I work with that are around middle school age, that tends to work pretty well with them seeing me as a potential ally as opposed to a threat.
Oh, absolutely. Sure. Are there times when you do have to step in? How do you know the difference between, let's say, a child that's just contrary? All right, he's going to push your buttons at every turn. He or she is going to, test the borderline any way that he can. How do you know? How do you differentiate from, okay, this child needs help. This child needs, like you say, needs a friend, needs an ally. Or this child needs to go into timeout and stay there until I say they can leave. How can you tell the difference?
Well, I've noticed that kids that are contrarians or kids that want to misbehave for the sake of misbehavior are oftentimes very intelligent. And a lot of that anger that they have comes from a place of them feeling like they're bored. They're better than a lot of what's going on. They don't need it spoon-fed to them. And so in those cases, I will talk to them as if they are a confidant rather than somebody that is like below me in status. I'll say, hey, look, I know you know this and I know you know what's going on, but this is how society works. So I just need you to play the game so that, we can get you where you need to go. Sometimes just addressing kids at that age as if they are adults and as if they have some autonomy, over their own decisions, that tends to help them. Also, you're positioning yourself as if you're on their side and you're just trying to get them where they need to go.
Yeah. You mentioned talking to kids in a non-threatening way. And you also mentioned being vulnerable, which I'm kind of curious about. How do you demonstrate vulnerability to a child that may or may not be able to understand what that is or recognize it?
I mean, I always share my dyslexia with my students. It tends to be part of my, first day of school spiel.
Really?
I'll tell them, hey, I couldn't read until I was in 4th grade, and I thought I was stupid. And I remember beating my head against a wall, and it was so easy for everybody else. I need them to know that I know how they feel, because empathy and a kid knowing that you get them and that you felt what they're feeling, that's the easiest way to get them to let their guard down and let you help them.
Sure.
Yeah.
In this day and age of COVID-19, like I said, there's a lot of people who have their kids at home now. They may be on the computer doing the distance learning and other things, but I would venture to say that parents are in a situation now where they're helping their children a lot more with their schoolwork than they ever imagined that they would be. Okay. Mm-hmm. What advice would you have for parents right now who are helping their kids with material, quite frankly, that they might have forgotten a lot about, like algebra and things like that? Dealing with that, balancing the act of keeping your children engaged and keeping them focused on their work. That's got to be very difficult. So,
and this is probably true for almost every school right now. First of all, we don't expect every family to even have access to the internet right now.
Right.
What we are doing is we are trying our best to make sure that the kids at least keep the information that they've learned so far in the year in their heads. So, it's going to change a lot which kids are going to be held back, which kids are going to go forward in the grade. And I would tell you, for the most part, most schools are probably going to pass them along.
Yeah.
We're not expecting parents to become teachers overnight. We're not expecting perfection. Some of them, we can't even expect their kids to get any of the work done because they just don't have access to it.
Yeah.
So really just at least trying, making sure that your kids are accountable, check that they've attempted to do their work, and encourage them to reach out to their teachers on the internet. That's already doing a great job.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of parents just need to take a breath and realize that we're all figuring this out together. We're doing the best that we can. And as long as you're doing your best, it's going to be okay.
Yeah. That's interesting. I know that it's too early to talk about it, but some people have mentioned certain grades being repeated. That's come up. That has come up. And I would imagine there's going to have to be some sort of an assessment at the beginning of the next school year, because even in the best of situations where people have professionals like you helping their kids, a lot of kids may not be able to go through. And I would have to say that this has really put them behind, being in a situation that is so fragmented. So do you have any idea what might happen there?
Well, I can't speak for every school. I just know what ours is doing. And we look a lot more at, especially with special education students, it's not about, do they have all the knowledge they need to have to go on to the next grade? Is it their fault that they don't? Because, this COVID thing it's none of these kids' fault. So, right. I mean, maybe if they were a kid that wasn't doing any of their work, that wasn't trying, that did absolutely nothing before the whole COVID thing happened, that kid might be considered for retention. But I don't think right now, at least not at our school, that we're going to be having, placement tests and stuff like that. It will be our responsibility to catch them up as the year progresses.
Okay.
But it's not really fair to them if they didn't learn something that we didn't teach them.
Right.
So
it's going to be, like you said, we're figuring this out as we go along. And to wrap this up, I'll ask you this. For the many people out there who have children, some in better situations than others simply because of their abilities. And, some children are going to do very well in a homeschooled environment. Others are not. And, of course, there's the whole social aspect where everybody's together pretty much 24 hours a day, and it can be very stressful. What would be your message? I don't want to say of hope, but maybe that's a good word. What message would you give to parents who are in that situation, who are desperately looking for a light at the end of the tunnel?
I think the most important thing right now is to be together with family. You don't need to create any more stress than the stress that already surrounds school. So, I mean, definitely encourage them to do their work, break it up into little pieces, give them 15 minutes at a time so they're not overwhelmed. But it's not worth the relationship you have with your kids to sacrifice trying to force them to complete at 100% mastery every single thing that they're assigned.
Yeah, that's great great advice. We've been talking to I'll call you KayPal7 from TikTok. And you can find her on TikTok. A lot of political commentary. She does touch on education issues every once in a while, but obviously the lion's share of what you're going to find her doing on TikTok is political. Not a political podcast, but just to go off topic here for a moment, since this is your forte. Okay. Donald Trump and Joe Biden seems to be the choice. I know me personally, what I say, this is like Dumb and Dumber. Okay. And which one is dumb and which one is dumber depends on your political affiliation. Okay. How would you describe it?
I think Trump might be smarter than Joe Biden if we're really thinking about intelligence. It's once again a situation where we're trying to pick the lesser of two evils.
Yeah.
And since I am a Democrat, for me, there's a lot of negative things about Biden. There's a lot of negative things about Trump. A lot of them have been accused of, these assaults and stuff like that. So, but at the end of the day, one of them is going to win. And although I hate buying into this whole two-party system, I would vote for Joe simply because I don't want Trump to put another Republican in the Supreme Court or to do any further damage to the environment. So for me, it's about damage control at this point. But I definitely, will not be waving a flag for Biden. He's definitely not my first choice.
I have a feeling with the COVID-19 restrictions, and we have no way of knowing how those are going to extend through the summer and the fall. With that going on, and with the screwball politics and everything else, it's shaping up to me to be like the biggest circus election of all time.
Oh, yes.
And that said, I've said, I would make a better presidential candidate. And it's not because I'm so smart. Okay. It's because what I'd be running against, I'd be like valedictorian at summer school. Okay. It's not. I can't believe in a country of 330 million people, this is the best we can offer up. I'm not sure what the answer is, Kay. I agree with you. I believe that he has had some good moments. He's done some things well that I like. And as an overriding thing with Biden, I suppose there's a part of me that says he's more empathetic to the working class, even though that might be part of the setup. That might be part of the marketing plan that I feel that way. But I feel that he probably is more in tune to what it's like to actually have to get up in the morning and work hard all day. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I don't know. It's going to be, the best I can tell you is it's going to be interesting, and time will tell.
Oh, definitely. I just hope that whichever one gets elected, that they listen to advisors that are smarter than they are.
Oh, yes. Yes, that's the big one right there. So anyway, KayPal7 on TikTok. You can also check her out on Twitter, KayPal3. A lot of my listeners are on Twitter. So just to let everybody know, you can find her there. Great political commentary. Even if you don't agree with her, she makes her case. And that would be the one thing I would say about you, too. You make a lot of comments about society and other things, and you at least can move the needle, because somebody like me, I feel I don't really have an overriding political ideology. I can take in what the other person has to say, and we really don't do that anymore. Everything is about the whataboutisms and the gotcha on the terminology. You said this, I heard you. That's not what that means. Blah, 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 blah. And they really don't hear the big point. And I feel you do an excellent job. Even if I didn't agree with you all the time, which is not true, I agree with you a lot of the time. But even if I didn't, I would still find you very captivating, because you make such well-researched intellectual commentary that you owe it to yourself to challenge how you feel about certain things, and listening to somebody like you can help you do that. You just do a fantastic job.
Thank you, Billy. I appreciate it.
Well, you're very welcome. Thank you very much for being on the podcast, Kay. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having me. I hope you have a great rest of your weekend.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. You've been listening to the Billy D's podcast. Again, you can follow me on Twitter and you can tweet me, but you got to be nice. You don't have to agree, but you have to be nice. At Billy D's on Twitter. You can catch the podcast on your favorite podcasting machine, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, on down the line. Thank you very much for listening to our podcast today. Well, hello, everyone. I am Billy D's from the self-titled Billy D's podcast. You can find me on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and many more of the best podcast networks. Join me for my commentary and interviews. Follow me on Twitter, real easy to find, at Billy D's. I am Billy D's. I'd love to have you listen in.